Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Success Design. I'm your host, Beth Schenkel-Anderson. Today is Friday, September 13th, 2013. I'm coming to you live from sunny Florida. I hope you all are having a great day today. I know I am, and my hope is that you are too. I've got a terrific show for you today. I have two guests who've written an extraordinary book that I'm excited to share with you. The authors are Gary and Carolyn Alder, and the book is The Evolution and Destruction of the Original Electoral College. So I'll just go ahead and welcome my guests, Gary and Carolyn. Hello and good afternoon.
Hello, it's great to be with you, Beth.
Hello, Beth.
Hi there. It's great to have you on the show today. As I said, you've written an extraordinary book about the Electoral College system and its origins and what it was originally meant to be. I've read the book from cover to cover and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was eye-opening. I've always taken for granted the Electoral College system as this sort of rubber stamp on the presidency, not really knowing its origins or how it came about or really what its purpose really was and what its purpose was intended to be, I should say. So I'm excited to have you on to explain it to us today. So, again, the title of the book is The Evolution and Destruction of the Original Electoral College. So, instead of me introducing you, why don't both of you just introduce yourselves, give us a little bit about your background and a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Okay, Gary wants me to go first. We have raised a family of 8 children, and they're all married now except for one daughter, and we have really enjoyed studying the Constitution in depth and detail since about 2004. Gary had retired, and we had more time to spend on that. We could see that we are really struggling as a nation, that we've lost the principles of freedom and the principles the nation was founded on. So we've been teaching Constitution classes since then. We were writing a bigger book. This book was kind of an appendix to that book that so we know it's only one little piece of very important concepts that the framers put together for freedom. Our Constitution, in fact, our website, the formula for freedom, is what we say the Constitution is, but it needs all the pieces, but this is one important piece. And I'll let Gary explain his background.
Okay, my background comes from systems analysis and programming. I worked on the old computers when the big mainframes were the thing, and we had to design systems so that we could process all the data going through there and organize and put concepts in so everything was regimented and so to speak, the data kind of flowed through there or marched through there in time. And so processing systems is what my background is all about. And so I look at the Constitution as the framers' specifications for a system of free government. And so as I look at it, I look at the specs. I don't look at the history first. My first concern is, what are the instructions? What are we told to do to set up a government?
Mm-hmm. So in writing the book, the first question I have here is, did the framers of the Constitution design a system to elect a president built on multiple years of campaigning, spending money, and billions of dollars of self-aggrandizing, canvassing the country, making campaign promises, buying votes, and catering to special interests? Of course, that's how we see campaigning and the Electoral College today.
Yes, and today that's what we're used to. That's what we see all around us. Our claim is that the Constitution was made to do just the opposite. Instead of to be an afterthought, it was to be the beginning of the selection of the best president possible. The way to get the best president possible is to get the best candidates possible. And only the electoral system has a method of getting the best candidates. The rest of the systems that you see are just a method of pushing candidates through.
Right, right. And why did the framers of the Constitution design a system to select a president for the United States using an electoral college?
Well, the Electoral College then was to be individuals outside of government. They wanted to get away from the government promoting itself and promoting its own people in there. And so the system to go outside of government for the initial selection of candidates was designed. And I think it was even hard for the framers in their time to live according to that. I mean, it was a very blue sky even for them. I would have to say that it was God using the framers that put these things into their minds, because they didn't thoroughly understand even what they were putting together in that Constitution, in my opinion.
So the Electoral College was filled with these electors, and these electors were people who were outside of government.
Yes, they were
okay.
they were outside of government, and they were to find the best nominees that they could. And in order to find those, they didn't want each elector to settle on one person. So they made them have two choices, and it wasn't the first and the second choice. I mean, as such, but they had each elector select the best two candidates that he could find. And in that process, it's really hard to focus on one when you're asked to provide two.
The concept that we have lost is the fact that the electors who were independent of government and they were located in each state would meet on the same day, and they would each nominate two individuals. And this nomination wasn't after years of campaigning and people putting themselves forward. These people would be nominating people who they had seen previously do things, maybe as a governor of their state or in Congress or in some other function. They had seen these people perform in the best interests of their country or their state. So it wasn't based on campaigning at all.
And what were the purposes and benefits of this system, this original system, I should say?
Okay, the benefit was that it kept the democratic process in check. Now, the framers certainly did not want a king. We'd just gotten rid of George, and we were glad to be rid of that problem. But we also didn't want to swing the pendulum totally to the other side and have a democracy. We wanted a system for freedom. And in order to have freedom, you need to control two elements. You need to control criminals, and you need to control the government. And, of course, laws are what we use to control criminals, but the Constitution is what is used to control the government. And to have a government under control, then you need to have a structure where one aspect cannot predominate. And so they set up a system where the states were represented, because we really had a federation, but it wasn't the kind of federation we had under the Articles of Confederation. It was to be a federation where the states took care of most of the people things, and the federal government then took care of the national things, the things that were an issue for the nation. So the job description of a president wasn't to solve people's individual problems. And that then would require a separate way to elect these individuals. So they had one branch, the House of Representatives, that was representing the people, the interest of the people, but actually the national interest of the people. The personal interest of the people was to be handled by their state and local governments. And one of the big things that was one of their biggest gripes, one of the biggest fears, is that they would provide a consolidated government. They were afraid of consolidation, and they being the people in a whole of America. And so the anti-federalists were accusing the federalists, who were those who were in favor of the Constitution, of consolidation. And the federalists were replying, no, we're not consolidating. We're not consolidating. We're retaining the federation, but we're making a more workable federation. And so it was this separation that they had to deal with. And one of the things that's important there is that you don't have one faction, party, group, one focal point that controls everything. Mm-hmm. And that's what they needed to build this, what we kind of coined the phrase constitutional federalism. Because when it was a federation, not a consolidation.
And why did the framers establish such a complex constitutional representative republic rather than just a regular democracy?
Right. A democracy, then, you have a win-lose situation. Okay, you're going to have somebody win and somebody lose, and you can see that in every election that goes on. You have winners and losers. Your parties come in. Everybody chooses between them, and there's going to be an element in democracy, throughout any republic. But they wanted to keep that in check, and so the way that they kept it in check was to divide the responsibility. And in fact, one of the things that was proposed that didn't actually get into the Constitution, I'm wishing it had, was that they had some verbiage there that was saying that the legislative doesn't mess with the judicial or the executive. The executive doesn't mess with the legislative or the judicial. The judicial doesn't mess with the executive or the legislative. They needed that separation. And so in order to retain that, then they needed to avoid parties. They weren't trying to succumb to parties. They were trying to avoid parties, which, we know historically it didn't last. But the original design was to be instead of having political parties. It was made on the assumption that there would be no political party.
And what's the significance of indirect and direct elections?
Okay, direct elections, we all understand that we get to vote our personal will. And in addition to our personal will, we have what I would call a national will. And it's just like in a corporation. Everybody can represent their own interest, but only certain individuals can represent the interest of the corporation or an interest of a certain portion of the corporation. Say it's the purchasing department. Only somebody who really knows about purchasing can represent the purchasing department or, any other department, cost accounting or whatever department. And so an indirect election is the way that you get that representation of an interest other than the personal interest. Okay, so we all know our personal interest is represented by direct election, and but our corporate, our state, or our national interest then has to be represented by someone who is qualified for that representation, and that's why they needed to have indirect elections, because there's only one interest that can be represented directly. In order to represent multiple interests, other than our personal interest, all other interests have to be represented indirectly.
Okay, and how many national level offices were to be directly elected by the people?
So direct election was only one office, the House of Representatives. That that is so that they could represent that interest, and that was obviously to be balanced by other interests. And so that's why we have the bicameral Congress, so that the people's interest, one interest can be represented by the House of Representatives, and a totally separate interest can be represented by the Senate. Now, see, we've kind of not more than kind of, we've gone vastly awry in our putting parties into power, because then the representatives are controlled by a party and the senators are controlled by a party, and so the effort there is to get the same party to control both houses. Well, that no longer represents separate interests. If we really wanted to represent separate interests, we'd have to have a Republican House and a Democratic House, and then those two houses would have to agree, or you wouldn't have laws, because each has an absolute veto on the other. And that's where, a consolidated government, it just wants to do it all. But a federal type government wants to make sure that these separate interests are represented. And so any law that passes has to meet the criteria of the Senate and the criteria of the House. While we do that in name today, the essence is, because we elect our senators by a popular vote, it's not the interest of the state. But by the interest of the state, we really mean the interest of the state government.
Mm-hmm.
Beth, can I insert something here? I think a concept that is totally lost and not understood at all is that the framers had really intended that every office at the national level of government would be elected by a different method, by a different group of individuals to represent these different interests that Gary's been talking about for different lengths term of service. So when we did turn the Senate over to popular vote with the 17th Amendment, then we just have our personal interests represented, and we've done away with the interests of the state government, which I think is a concept that we just have kind of lost when we ask the question of direct and indirect elections. Nowadays, we think every person should vote for every office, and this popular phrase of one body, one vote. Well, that doesn't represent the state governments and these other interests that we've been talking about.
Sure. And what was the important role of the electors, and why were they to be independent from the government influence? I know we've talked about that earlier, but specifically, what was their important role, and why were they supposed to be independent?
Their role was the nomination role, and that has since been taken over by political parties. But the original specifications of the Constitution show me that is the role of the electors, was to bring forth the first names to suggest who might be the possibilities. In our book, we break it down into the three phases of any election: the nomination, the narrowing down, and the final choice. We call them the possibilities, the probabilities, and the pick, just to simplify it. And so we needed to have a group outside of government to make the nomination. And then we had a group inside of government, specifically the House of Representatives. But in that role, they did not act as individual representatives. They acted as a delegation from their state. So each state only got one vote, even if they had 13 representatives or 2 representatives or 55 representatives or however many. There was only one vote for that state. And because we got the best nominees possible, then we could turn it over to our existing government to say, okay, which of these nominees then are we going to elect for the president? And so the people couldn't be bribed. And that's the great advantage of this system, couldn't be bribed to say, hey, I'll give you this if you elect me. That wasn't the president's job. It wasn't the federal government's job. And that was the role of the states, and that's what they didn't want usurped by what they called a consolidated government.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked about constitutional federalism a little bit earlier in the show, but what is the principle of constitutional federalism, and how is it implemented in the election of the president?
Okay, that's basically what Gary had just talked about a little bit, that we have the input of the individuals and we also have the input of the states. The constitutional federalism, with the previous federalism that they had, all states had an equal vote regardless of their population. Mm-hmm. And the larger states and the smaller states are equally represented in the final pick. So if you have a state, when the House of Representatives makes the final choice, if you have a state like California with 55 representatives, they just have one voice for a final pick, as with Wyoming, who only has one representative. They have an equal voice, so you have your federalism in the final pick, but you have your population in the nomination. Maybe I didn't explain that very well, but in just a federation like they had under the Articles of Confederation, every state had an equal voice all the time.
And that fact was a real disturbance to a lot of the framers. That hey, we've got all these people in Virginia, and yet Delaware is going to get equal representation. Well, in some cases that's valid. In other cases it's not valid. And so they needed to address both those issues. So in the nomination function, the Electoral College favored the larger states by having more electors from the larger states. They did some weighting so it wouldn't be as disproportionate. But in the final election, they were considered independent states, not just political subdivisions like we call a province and that's how we function today. Basically, a state today is more like a province in other nations. But they wanted to maintain that independence again, so that the state could represent the people and work with the people and take care of the people's needs, and the federal government was to take care of national needs. James Madison in Federalist 39 does an excellent job of just explaining the difference between national government and federal government. And a national government probably we would consider a consolidated government. And a federal government would be an association. And so that principle of constitutional federalism has the attributes of national, it has the attributes of federal. And combines both of them in a way that provides many benefits and many protections that we've long since lost.
Right. And how did political parties subvert the unique process established by the framers with this original Electoral College?
Okay, so the first thing that the political parties had to do to take control away from the specifications in the Constitution would be to get a consolidated government, where you'd have win-lose. Mm-hmm. You'd have controlling party and the other party that is being controlled. And so they started out by dividing into parties, and then they their first target, and they were successful in it, was to destroy the Electoral College. The Electoral College was destroyed, it was set in motion to be destroyed by the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment then presupposed that the candidates were already running as a team. Okay, now we had this situation in 1800, and Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr came out in the Electoral College with the same number of electoral votes, which is unlikely. It's unlikely that Aaron Burr would be as unique an individual among independent electors as Thomas Jefferson. But yet, because the party system was behind the scenes and they were pushing these candidates, we got these two of the same party. And so they were deciding who was going to be president and who was going to be vice president. And as you read the debates, the Senate debates on the 12th Amendment, you could see how, again, a majority of the senators felt like the party was the way to go, and that they should be one of those men chosen by the electors was to be president, and the other was to be vice president. So they separated it first into a separate vote. Well, now he took away the basis of the Electoral College, so that the Electoral College was so that they couldn't support one man for president. They had to name two. Well, now they named one for president and one for vice president. So they've taken out the very essence of why the Electoral College was put together, so that they were now supporting a final choice, and they were making then the Electoral College a rubber stamp, a final choice, albeit there is a chance that the one who didn't get the popular vote would get the vote of the states. It's really not the same concept at all. It's not the nomination concept, and that's what the Electoral College was all about. And so that started it, and then they started working on the Senate. So the first pin to fall was the president. So that came out of the constitutional federalism concept and now into the popular vote concept. And next they started working on the senators. And the senators then became, in 1913, again, elected by the people to represent the interests of the people. Now the interest of the states was no longer, even officially, even though everything that happened long before it's finalized is going on. So these changes were being made, senators were being bought, parties were being more controlling the system, and it became a party system rather than the system the Constitution had designed.
Okay, well, did you want to add something else? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
The first pin to fall was the presidential election, and they did that by subverting the independence of the electors. So instead of the electors speaking their own will, they were speaking the party's will.
And so the electors were also being chosen by parties according to who they were deciding. The parties were deciding up front who the candidates would be. Mm-hmm. And so parties usurped the nomination function so that the elector's job was just to rubber stamp who the parties had already decided should win.
Mhm. Right, that makes perfect sense. As looking at the Electoral College system today, that makes sense. And the parties took over, and now they've completely taken over the nomination process. And then they rubber stamp it at the end of the election cycle. Once the popular vote's been cast, they come in to cast their votes for their state, and that's that. So.
And if they don't follow their party's choice, they can be penalized by a fine or an automatic replacement, or, it's really ridiculous. It is really just a total rubber stamp. There is no individual thought at all.
In fact, in Utah, where we were living when we wrote the book, if an elector votes for someone other than his party's choice, that is considered to be his resignation, and the other electors will select another elector. So there is no choice being made by the electors. There's nothing. Whereas in the original, you didn't know who the nominees were until the electoral votes were opened. And the electors had gone home, no longer part of it. You know, so after the one meeting that they had, and they put their nominating vote in there, they're out of it. And then later on, when the votes are open, then you know who the candidates are. And you have no idea until that point. And once they know who the candidates are, they immediately go into the House chambers where the Senate can witness the House voting, and the House votes by state, even though it's all of the representatives are part of the contingency, which is similar to the original Articles of Confederation type meetings where they would have the state's representation.
Yeah.
Yes.
The thing I was really interesting in the last election, of course, a couple of years before. I mean, everything happens a few years before the actual election now. But when each state was vying to be first for their primaries, like New Hampshire, Ohio, Nevada, all these places were trying to be first to have their primary election, and they were saying, oh, Nevada can't do that. We've done it for years and years. New Hampshire can't be first. And I thought, how funny, because originally the way the framers set it up, every state would nominate on the same day in their own state, and there was none of this campaigning for years in advance and the political agendas and the party, you know, and billions of dollars being spent. I mean, to me, it was so ridiculous to watch this stuff go on, but nobody had the concept of how it was really supposed to happen.
Right, and that goes back to the first question I posed about did the framers design a system of campaigning to spend millions and billions of dollars and self-aggrandizing and canvassing the country, making campaign promises? And the answer, of course, is no. They designed a nonpartisan, non-campaigning, indirect method based on merit and past performance. They wanted statesmen to be nominated, and then the House of Representatives then to vote on those statesmen, and that would be a very clean process, ideally.
Ideally.
Yes. And,
so, as we're wrapping up here, is there anything that the two of you would like to add, just as in closing?
How do we get this information to people so they understand what we do is so ridiculous and compared to what was designed?
Yes. Well, your website is www.freedomformula.us, and you can also find the book on Amazon.com as well. I actually wrote a review of your book. I don't know if you know that, but I did. I liked it so much. It was a very good read, and it will give people a better understanding of what we're talking about on the show. If you read the book and then listen to the show, you'll understand and better about what we're discussing. And the book is The Evolution and Destruction of the Original Electoral College.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Oh, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. So, would any of you like to offer anything in closing, or should I just wrap up the show?
We certainly appreciate the opportunity, and we appreciate what you're doing, helping get the information out.
And one point, we've tried to design our website different than other websites. Most websites are advertising vehicles. Ours is designed to be an education vehicle. So we invite people to come and get onto the website and just study, bounce from place to place, and whatever you need to study there. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you both. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. And for the Success Design with Beth Schenkel Anderson, this is Beth signing off.
Thank you.